Today's video has it all. Heroes, gods and monsters. Infidelity, incest, bestiality, parasite, war, and also plenty of love. That's right, we're going to talk about Greek mythology. In the previous video, we covered the origin of the cosmos and the Olympian gods. You don't really need to see that one, but some people find it helpful to have all the background to a story. In any case, if you have already seen that first part, or you don't need to understand every branch of every family tree, stay here with us as we delve into this second episode of our series about Greek mythology, the Age of Heroes. This age began after the great flood which the god Zeus had sent to destroy mankind for being a bunch of selfish idiots. Two children of the primeval Titans, Deucalion and Pyrrha, managed to survive the flood and repopulate the world. It was then that these epic heroes started popping up all over the place, fruit of liaisons between mortals and the gods, especially Zeus. He was a horny dog. And now that you know the context, let's have a look at some of the world's most legendary heroes. Zeus and the mortal Io had a son called Epaphus. One of his later descendants was Acrisius, king of Argos, who married Eurydice and had a baby girl called Danae. The only problem was that the king wanted a boy, but when he went to consult the oracle about this, he got a very unsettling prediction. He would have a male heir, a grandson by his daughter Danae, but that child would end up killing him. King Acrisius reacted to this news by locking up Danae, but that didn't help, because Zeus had already got his eye on the girl, and one night he came to her in the form of a shower of gold and got her pregnant, which is how she gave birth to our hero Perseus. Some time later, King Acrisius heard the baby crying inside the cell. Furious, he threw Danae and the boy into a wooden chest and cast them into the sea, hoping to be rid of them. But the chest ended up in the net of a fisherman named Dictys, who rescued the mother and child and took them into his family. This Dictys was the brother of Polydectes, king of the island of Seriphos, who took a fancy to Danae, but Perseus was always around to ward him off. Until one day, King Polydectes organized a banquet to announce his marriage to Hippodamia and requested contributions from everyone. All the guests brought lavish gifts except for Perseus, who was poor, and so he was disgraced. But, if nothing else, he was a confident young lad, and since Polydectes appeared to have forgotten about his mother, he promised the king anything in the world that he wanted. The sneaky Polydectes then asked for the head of Medusa, believing that Perseus would die in this mission. But not only did Perseus survive, this quest would write his name into the history books forever. Mind you, Perseus had help from the goddess Athena, who explained to him that Medusa was one of the 3 Gorgons, creatures so horrible that looking into their eyes would turn you to stone. She also gave Perseus a reflecting shield, which he could use to see the monster and avoid her gaze, while Hermes gave him a steel sickle to cut her head. Athena then advised him to gather 3 magic items guarded by the Stygian nymphs. But their location was only known to the Graeae, 3 old sisters who shared a single eye and a single tooth. Perseus managed to find the Graeae, steal that eye, and exchange it for the info he needed. That was how he found the nymphs, from whom he then got a pair of flying sandals, a magic bag to keep the head of Medusa, and Hades' helm, which made him invisible. Once kitted out, Perseus traveled to the land of Hyperborea where the Gorgons lived, and thanks to all the equipment and the advice that he had gathered, he managed to cut off Medusa's head. Out of her dead body sprung the flying horse Pegasus and the warrior Chrysaor. Perseus then shoved Medusa's head into the bag and managed to escape from the other 2 Gorgons using the sandals and the helm. On the way back home, the Titan Atlas refused to let him stay at the Garden of the Hesperides because a prophecy foretold that the garden would be sacked by a son of Zeus. And this prophecy was correct, as we will see later. Perseus, who didn't take rejection well, pulled out Medusa's head and turned Atlas into rock. According to the legend, this was how the Atlas Range was formed. Later, while flying over Ethiopia, he saw a young girl chained to a cliff. This girl was Princess Andromeda, and she was being offered to appease the sea monster Ceto, which had been sent as a punishment against the kingdom of the girl's mother, Queen Cassiopeia, after she had offended the deities by saying her daughter was the most beautiful girl in the world. Perseus killed the monster and then demanded the hand of Andromeda, but some of her relatives tried to refuse him, so he turned them all to stone. After all this, he finally returned to Seriphos, and there he also turned to stone King Polydectes and his minions, placing his adoptive father Dictys on the throne. Perseus then gifted Medusa's head to Athena for all her help and decided to reconcile with his grandfather, Acrisius, king of Argos. But just as the prophecy had foretold, Perseus did end up killing his granddad, albeit by accident. It happened during a sporting competition, when Perseus threw a discus, with pretty terrible aim it must be said, and hit the king, boom, right on the head.
Oké, ik wens je succes en laten we erin.
Devastated, Perseus refused to take the throne of Argos and instead swapped places with his cousin Megapenthes, who was said to become king of Tiryns. Perseus also founded the city of Mycena and had many children known as the Perseids, one of whom, Perses, went to live in Phoenicia and is thought to have given rise to the Persians. The hero Bellerophon was the son of the king of Corinth. He lived a miserable life after having killed his brother and also being falsely accused of trying to force the wife of Proteus, king of Tiryns. Nobody dared to execute him and risk angering the gods because he was thought to be a son of Poseidon. So instead, he was sent to kill the Chimera, a freaky hybrid monster which would surely eat him for breakfast. On his way, he captured the flying horse Pegasus, and together they managed to riddle the monster with arrows and kill it. Bellerophon was eventually able to prove his innocence and became a popular guy. Unfortunately, the fame went to his head, and he decided to fly up to Mount Olympus with Pegasus. Zeus didn't like this cockiness, so he knocked Bellerophon down, and that was the end of him. But Pegasus did manage to reach the skies and became a lovely constellation. How nice. The god Poseidon, just like his brother Zeus, also had a few extramarital affairs. His most famous relationship was with Aethra, wife of King Aegeus of Athens, which resulted in the birth of Theseus. The boy grew up in Trojan, far from the royal court, until he turned 16 and his mother told him the truth about his origin.
I want the truth!
Upon learning about his lineage, Theseus lifted a rock where his father had hidden a royal sword and sandals and made his way to Athens to be recognized as the king's son. On the way there, he defeated Periphetes, the club bearer, and took his staff. He also killed other evil characters like Sciron, who kicked travelers into the sea to be devoured by a turtle, and also Thersion, king of Eleusis. Eventually, Theseus reached Athens, where his dad's consort, the sorceress Medea, tried to get rid of him so he wouldn't take the throne from her own child. She got the king to set Theseus the task of capturing the infamous bull of Marathon, which he accomplished. Aegeus then recognized him as his own legitimate son and kicked Medea out of the kingdom.
Go away! I never want to see you again!
At that time, Athens had a big problem. King Minos, who every 9 years demanded a tribute of 14 youngsters to be devoured by the Minotaur. Okay, here we're gonna do a quick interlude to explain how things got to this point. As we saw in the previous episode, Zeus, in the shape of a white bull, abducted a Phoenician princess called Europa and took her to the island of Crete. It is thought that the name Europa means sunset or place where the sun sets, and that it later acquired the meaning of the western or occidental lands, hence the name of the continent. After having 3 children with Europa, Rhadamanthus, Sarpedon and Minos, Zeus abandoned her in Crete. The king of the island, Asterion, took in Europa and adopted her children, and eventually left the throne to Minos. As with almost every element in mythology, there is a bit of controversy here. Some people believe that there were 2 Minos. This was the good one, and the other one, his grandson, was a rotten apple. Others believe that they are one and the same. In any case, for his coronation, Minos asked Poseidon for a bull to sacrifice it in his honor, and then lo and behold, a bull came out of the sea. But it was such an amazing bull that Minos decided to hide it and sacrifice another one instead. Poseidon realized this, he was a god after all, and punished Minos in a typical Greek mythology freaky way. He made his wife Pasiphae fall madly in love with the bull, to the point that she got busy with it. Ugh, how? And the result of this zoophilic relationship was the Minotaur. When Minos found out what had happened, he flipped out and decided to hide away the mutant monster in a giant labyrinth designed by Daedalus, his genius architect. Things went relatively well for a while, until one day Minos' son Androgeus won an athletic competition, and the jealous king of Athens, Aegeus, challenged him to kill the bull of Marathon. This ended with the kid dying, although it's not entirely clear if he was killed by the bull or was assassinated. Either way, Minos was furious. He invaded the region of Attica and imposed the tribute we mentioned: 7 boys and 7 girls every 9 years who would be thrown into the labyrinth to be devoured by the Minotaur. This is how things stood for many years until our brave hero Theseus came into the story. After being recognized by his father Aegeus, Theseus decided to kill the Minotaur. He volunteered as one of the tributes and traveled to Crete. When he got to the royal palace of Knossos, he met one of Minos' daughters, Ariadne, who fell in love with a handsome lad and asked Theseus to take her away with him. To help him in his quest of killing the Minotaur, she slipped Theseus a ball of thread and a sword. Theseus then tied one end of the thread to the entrance and went to the monster's encounter. After finding it and having a big smackdown, Theseus killed the Minotaur and then managed to make his way back following the thread. He picked up Ariadne and the other tributes and they all fled the island. Sounds like a perfect ending, doesn't it? The hero Theseus had killed the ugly monster, rescued the girl and the other kids, and was now on his way back home to Athens. Well, here comes the screw-up. Theseus' father, King Aegeus, had been extremely worried for his son, so before he left for Crete, he had asked him to put up white sails on his boat when he returned, to let him know that everything had gone well. But on the journey back, Theseus had too much on his mind and forgot about this. So when King Aegeus saw the black sails on the boat, he thought his son had died and killed himself, jumping into the sea from a high cliff. This act of royal stupidity gave origin to the name of the Aegean Sea, and also made Theseus the new king of Athens. Meanwhile, back in Crete, King Minos was mad at Daedalus for giving Ariadne the ball of thread, so he locked him up in his own labyrinth, or in a tower, according to other versions of the myth. Wherever it was, Daedalus and his son Icarus managed to escape thanks to some wings he invented, but Icarus got carried away and flew too close to the sun. This melted the wax that held the wings together, and Icarus plummeted to his death. The story says that after escaping, Daedalus found refuge at the court of King Cocalus in Sicily. But when King Minos found out that he had escaped, he determined to kill Daedalus and went looking for him all over the Mediterranean, asking every king he encountered the riddle of how to run a thread through a spiral seashell. King Cocalus asked Daedalus to solve it, which he did by tying the thread to an ant. But when he saw the threaded seashell, Minos knew for sure that Daedalus was being protected by Cocalus and demanded his return. The Sicilian king said, "Sure, my friend, but before that, have a nice bath." And then his daughters boiled Minos alive. Meanwhile, after going through all the labyrinth business, Theseus abandoned Ariadne at the island of Naxos. But lucky for her, on the island she met Dionysus, with whom she enjoyed a few pretty crazy nights. I mean, he was the god of wine and parties. Together they sired Enopion, the personification of wine, who later became king of Chios. Orion, another son of Poseidon, this time with the Gorgon Euryale, fell in love with Enopion's daughter, Merope, and one day he drunkenly assaulted her. This was a bad idea. Enopion tore out his eyes and kicked him out of Chios. But the god Helios took pity and cured him. Whereupon Orion, as a sign of gratitude, decided to hunt every single animal in the world. This angered the primeval goddess Gaia, who had created all of those animals. So she sent a giant scorpion to kill him. But somehow both Orion and the scorpion ended up as constellations. Finally, poor Ariadne didn't end her days very happily. She was killed by Perseus, but it's not very clear why. Laius was king of Thebes, and with his wife Jocasta they had a boy called Oedipus, but an oracle had foretold the king the usual Greek prophecy, that his son would eventually kill him. So Laius messed up the child's feet and then abandoned him in the mountains, hoping he would die. Of course, the boy didn't die. He was rescued by a shepherd and ended up being raised by the king of Corinth. Several years later, an oracle told Oedipus that he would one day kill his father and marry his own mother. Oedipus, who didn't know that he was adopted, freaked out and ran away from Corinth. On the road, he came across King Laius, his real father.
I am your father.
With whom he got into an argument and then a fight which ended in Oedipus killing Laius. At that time, Thebes was being tormented by the Sphinx, a monster sent by Zeus's wife, the goddess Hera, which posed riddles and killed those who couldn't solve them. Oedipus went to try his luck and managed to solve the riddle and kill the monster. He then became king of Thebes and married his real mother Jocasta, thus fulfilling the prophecy. Years later, Jocasta discovered that Oedipus was the one who had killed Laius and worked out the whole twisted story. Deranged, she hung herself, while Oedipus tore out his own eyes and fled Thebes, cursing the children, or brothers, he had had with Jocasta. But the tragic story doesn't end there. It continues with two of those cursed children, Polynices and Eteocles. They were taking turns as kings of Thebes until Eteocles got greedy and decided to kick out his brother and keep the throne to himself. Polynices sought support to fight his brother in other cities, and the king of Argos, Adrastos, helped him by recruiting 7 paladins who tried to conquer Thebes. These were known as the 7 against Thebes. After a long siege, the 7 were beaten back and the 2 quarreling brothers ended up killing each other. If you ask me, they should have done it straight away and saved everyone a lot of trouble. Anyway, the action wasn't over yet. 10 years later, the children of those 7 heroes sought revenge against Thebes. This was the War of the Epigoni, and this time round, Thebes was conquered. Without any doubt, the most famous Greek hero was Heracles, later known as Hercules by the Romans, but initially named Alcides. According to the legend, he was born in Thebes, but considered Argos as his second home since that was where his family came from. While the king of Tyrians was away, Zeus slept with his wife Alcmene, and this produced the demigod Alcides. To make the boy immortal, Zeus placed him on Hera's bosom while she was asleep, so that he would drink the magic milk from her heavenly breast. But Hera woke up with a start, and the milk was spilled all over, forming the Milky Way. Maybe that's why Hera never liked Heracles, and she was the worst possible enemy to have. On one occasion, she slipped 2 snakes into the baby's cradle, but he was already a tough nut and killed them with his bare hands. When he turned 18, King Theseus asked him to get rid of the pesky Lion of Cytherion, and in reward, the king let Heracles sleep with a different one of his 50 daughters every night. They all became pregnant, and these children were known as the 50 Thespiades.
Boom, 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 boom.
Later, Heracles married the daughter of King Creon of Thebes, Megara.
My friends call me Meg.
But Hera was still bent on ruining his life, so she made him go insane and kill his wife, his own children, and the children of his half-brother Iphicles. When he recovered, seeking to atone for his sins, he traveled to the Oracle of Delphos and changed his name to Heracles, in honor of Hera. Then he had to place himself at the service of King Eurystheus of Tiryns and complete a series of labors to gain a heavenly pardon and become immortal. The missions he had to accomplish were the following.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
First, hunt down another lion, the Lion of Nemea. He did this and then used the animal's pelt to make his mythical armor. Next, kill the Hydra of Lerna and its giant crab friend. He did this with the help of his nephew Iolaus, who burned the necks of the monster to prevent it regrowing its heads. For his third task, he captured the golden hind of Cerynea in the northern land of Hyperborea. After that, he had to overcome the centaurs in order to hunt the Erymanthean boar. Then he cleaned the filthy stables of King Augeas by changing the course of 2 rivers. The next task was to drive away a plague of pesky birds from Lake Stymphalos. Heracles accomplished this using a magic clapper that the goddess Athena had given him. His 7th labor was to capture the bull of Crete, the very same one that Pasiphae, wife of King Minos, had fallen in love with and had sired the Minotaur. This gigantic bull was wreaking havoc, but Heracles managed to wrestle it down and take it to Mycenae. This was considered as mission accomplished, even though later the bull was freed and ended up in Attica, where it killed the son of Minos and caused the invasion of Athens and the rest of the story we saw earlier. The tributes to the Minotaur, Theseus and all that. Incidentally, this is supposed to be the same bull that Theseus killed at Marathon in order to be recognized by his father. Returning to Heracles, he traveled to Thrace and brought back the mares of the giant Diomedes, which he had trained to eat human flesh. This turned out to be a mistake by Diomedes, as he ended up being eaten by them. The next challenge was to steal the girdle of Hippolyta, queen of the Amazons of Themyscira, and for this mission, Heracles was accompanied by Theseus. The girdle was a present from the god Ares, because Hippolyta was his own daughter. It seems that the queen liked the strapping young Hercules and was quite prepared to just give him the girdle, along with the rest of her clothes, but before she could do that, the goddess Hera turned into an Amazon and began to spread the rumor that Heracles had kidnapped Hippolyta. The Amazons were furious and all hell broke loose. In the ensuing battle, Heracles ended up killing Hippolyta and taking her girdle. But just to make things a bit more confusing, Theseus did kidnap one of the Amazons, Hippolyta's sister Antiope, although he later abandoned her to marry Phaedra, the sister of Ariadne, the other girl he had abandoned. Antiope did not take this rejection well. She gathered the Amazons and attacked Athens to stop the wedding. But the Athenians defeated them, and that was the end of it. But we're not yet done with Heracles' tasks. The last 3 were the most dangerous and complicated. The 10th was stealing the cattle of the giant Geryon in Erythea, which may have been the lovely Spanish city of Cádiz. As he was sailing there, he found his way blocked by rocks, so he used his super strength to push them apart, thus creating the Straits of Gibraltar, marked by the famous Pillars of Hercules. Geryon was a 3-bodied giant, the strongest guy in the world, and his cattle was guarded by Eurytion, son of Ares, and his 2-headed dog Orpheus. But none of this made much difference to Hercules, who killed them all with poisoned arrows, loaded the herd into his boat, and made his way back home. The 11th task was to steal the golden apples which conferred immortality from the garden of the Hesperides, which was protected by those nymphs and the dragon Ladon. Heracles began by freeing the titan Prometheus from his eternal torture, who then advised him not to take the apples from the tree with his own bare hands, leaving it instead to his own brother, the titan Atlas, as he would know where to find the garden and would also be trusted by the Hesperides. Heracles followed this advice, found Atlas and offered him a deal. He would take the titan's place holding up the skies as long as Atlas promised to obtain the apples and take them to Mycenae to fulfill the task. Of course, Atlas accepted straight away, but Heracles was a conman. When Atlas returned to show him the apples, Heracles told him, "Hey, before you go, can you just hold up the sky for a second so I can get my footing right?" Surprisingly, it worked. The naive Atlas was left holding the skies while Heracles ran off with the apples.
How do you like them apples?
Okay, I know what you're thinking. But I thought Atlas had been turned into rock by Perseus using Medusa's head. Listen, you have to understand that these Greek myths were written and rewritten over many centuries by many different people, so there are multiple chronologies. In fact, each myth has several versions, and they often contradict each other, so you shouldn't take them too seriously. And now finally, we arrive at the last and hardest task, which was bringing to Mycenae none other than Cerberus, the 3-headed dog with a serpent tail that guarded the entrance to Hades. Heracles had to be initiated in the Eleusinian mysteries before he could enter the Underworld, but once he made it there, he freed Theseus, who had been stuck in Hades with his buddy Pirithous, while trying to kidnap Persephone. He also came across the spirit of Meleager, a famous hero who had killed the boar of Calydon. To get his help, Heracles promised Meleager that he would marry his sister, and with his guidance, he managed to make it through the Underworld, escaping from many dangers and eventually coming face to face with his uncle Hades, who allowed him to take the doggo as long as he promised to treat it well. After completing all of his labors, Heracles retired to live a peaceful life. He fulfilled his promise to marry Meleager's sister, Deianira, and together they had several children, the oldest of whom was Hylas. Sadly, Deianira ended up killing Heracles by accident when she gave him a shirt soaked in venomous Hydra's blood, which she thought was a love potion. Deianira was so upset by this that she killed herself, while Hylas and his siblings, known as the Heraclidae, tried to take over all of Greece, but their initial attempt failed and they had to retreat to the north. After many years, they returned, and this time they were successful. This is thought to be the Dorian invasion, which we mentioned in the video about ancient Greek history. This story begins with Athamas, son of Iolaus, a descendant of Deucalion and Pyrrha, who became king of Thebes. He had a wife, Nephele, and 2 children, Phrixus and Hele. Athamas later repudiated Nephele to marry Ino, who hated the children and conspired with the oracle to make the king sacrifice them. But just as Athamas was about to kill his children, Zeus intervened, sending a golden ram to save them. The kids flew away on the ram's back, but Hele fell off and drowned in a place which came to be known known as the Hellespont. Phrixus made it to Colchis, where King Aeetes granted him asylum and offered him his daughter Chalciope in marriage. As a sign of gratitude, Phrixus sacrificed the ram and gave its golden fleece to the king, who hung it from an oak guarded by the fearsome dragon of Colchis. The second part of this story concerns Jason, whose uncle Peleus had killed his father and brothers to take over the throne of Iolcus in Thessaly. Jason had been saved by his mother and sent to be reared by the centaur Chiron, who had tutored several other heroes. When he grew up, Jason returned to the city to claim the throne. Peleus didn't want to fight, so he told Jason that if he brought back the golden fleece of Colchis, he would step down peacefully. Jason then recruited the 50 best warriors throughout Greece, and together they embarked on the ship Argo, thus being known as Jason and the Argonauts. See what they did there? Among these brave adventurers were Heracles, Meleager, Orpheus, Asterius and Argus, who had built the ship. Their journey was a long one and full of fascinating adventures. In Lemnos, they slept with smelly women who wouldn't let them leave. Heracles was abandoned on land after spending several days searching for his friend Hylas. They also fought Amycus, king of the Bebryces, in a boxing match. Near Thrace, they rescued Phineus from the Harpies, monstrous winged women who stole all his food. And eventually, after many more capers, the Argonauts reached Colchis. Once there, King Aeetes promised to give Jason the golden fleece if he managed to complete some impossible tasks. Yoke the wild bulls he had gotten from the god Hephaestus and use them to sow the teeth of the dragon guarding the fleece. From these teeth would rise the Espartoi, warriors that he would have to defeat. Luckily for Jason, as often happens in these situations, the king's daughter, the sorceress Medea, fell in love with him and decided to help him. Thanks to her, Jason completed all the tasks and they run away with the golden fleece before King Aeetes could stop them. But the adventure wasn't quite over yet. On the way back, they avoided the clashing rocks and the songs of the sirens thanks to Orpheus, who played an even more beautiful melody on his lyre. They also overcame the sea monsters Scylla and Charybdis, and later, when they reached the island of Crete, King Minos made them fight against the giant Talos, an automaton created by Daedalus. Eventually they made it back to Iolcus, where King Peleus was not expecting them to return, but Medea used her magic to make the king's daughters kill him, and Jason finally regained his rightful throne. But after going through all that fuss to become king, he decided that he didn't really like Iolcus, and instead ended up retiring to Corinth with Medea. Some people are never happy. After the Golden Fleece adventure, Orpheus was living happily with his wife Eurydice, when one day Aristeus, son of the god Apollo, tried to force her. She managed to avoid him, but in escaping, she stepped on a venomous snake which bit her, and she died. Instead of grieving, Orpheus mustered his courage and descended into the underworld, seeking to rescue her. After putting Cerberus to sleep with his music, he presented his case to Hades, who allowed him to take Eurydice under one condition. He was not allowed to look at her until they were both safe under the sun's light. I suppose you can imagine what happened next. They managed to make it all the way to the edge of the underworld, but just as they were about to step outside, Orpheus couldn't help himself and turned round to look at his wife. She then passed out and was stuck in Hades forever. All the craziness related to the famous dynasty of the Atreidae began with another one of Zeus's sons, Tantalus, the rich king of Phrygia. He was very chummy with the gods and was even invited for dinner at Mount Olympus every now and then. But those friendships in high places went to his head, and the guy started to boast about it, reveal divine secrets, and even steal some godly nectars and other stuff. The last straw was when he decided to hold a banquet for the gods. You might think, nothing wrong with that, except that the main course was the boiled flesh of his own son Pelops. The gods did not see the funny side of this. They sent Tantalus to the underworld and resurrected Pelops, who later ended up ruling a city in the region and giving his name to the Peloponnesus. On his way to the throne, he married Hippodamia, princess of Olympia, whose hand he obtained by winning a chariot race, albeit with a little trickery. One of Pelops's children, Atreus gave name to the dynasty of the Atreidae, or the House of Atreus. He and his twin brother Theseus were exiled by their father for killing their half-brother Chrysippus. They went to Mycenae, where King Eurystheus welcomed them, but soon after, the king died fighting the Heracleidae, and the oracle said that the successor should be whoever carried the Golden Fleece, the symbol of royalty. That was Atreus, but his wife Arope secretly gave it to his brother Theseus, who was her lover, and so Theseus was crowned king. But then Zeus told the dejected Atreus that he would help him retake the throne. So then Atreus made a wager with Theseus that if, on the next day, the sun set on the east, he would relinquish the throne. Naturally, Theseus thought this was crazy and agreed to it, but then Zeus intervened, the sun changed direction for that day, and Atreus became king of Mycenae. Atreus then had 3 children who you might have heard of: Agamemnon, Menelaus, and Anaxibia. The trouble began when Atreus found out about the infidelity of his wife Arope with Theseus. He got mad and took revenge by throwing her off a cliff. And then he killed all the children of his brother Theseus, cooked them, and served them to him. When Atreus told Theseus what he had eaten, with his belly full, he cursed all of Atreus' descendants. But Theseus would eventually become king once again thanks to Aegisthus, a son he had had with his own daughter Pelopeia, who killed his uncle Atreus, made his father king, and expelled the Atreidae. Agamemnon and Menelaus fled to the court of King Tyndareus of Sparta. According to the myth, this king had done a threesome with his wife, Leda, and Zeus in the shape of a swan. Leda birthed 2 eggs, out of which came 2 pairs of twins, Helen and Clytemnestra, and Castor and Pollux, also known as the Dioscuri. King Tyndareus lent his army to Agamemnon and Menelaus so they could topple their uncle. Agamemnon then became king of Mycenae and married Clytemnestra, with whom he fathered Electra, Iphigenia, Orestes, and Chrysothemis, while his brother Menelaus married the other daughter of King Tyndareus, the beautiful Helen, and later became king of Sparta. And now we need to make a quick detour to introduce another part of the story. Thetis, one of the 50 Nereids, daughters of the primeval sea god Nereus, was given in a marriage of convenience to Peleus, king of Phthia. That wedding ended up causing plenty of misery, because they hadn't invited a certain individual who always caused trouble.
Eris, the goddess of discord.
True to her fame, Ares turned up anyway and brought one of the apples of the Hesperides, declaring it should be for the fairest of the goddesses. As you can imagine, this caused all kinds of mayhem, as Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena started fighting over the apple of discord. So Zeus tried to settle the dispute by asking Paris, a young prince of Troy, to name the fairest one. Talk about a hot potato. This judgment of Paris would eventually unleash the Trojan War, because Paris chose Aphrodite, goddess of beauty, love, and reproduction, and in reward she promised him the love of the most beautiful mortal woman. Unfortunately, that happened to be Helen, the wife of King Menelaus, as we will see in a minute. The misery didn't end with the wedding, because Peleus and Thetis had several babies, but they all kept dying. In despair, Thetis sought to make her last son, Achilles, invulnerable by dipping him into the river Styx, but since she was holding him by the ankle, that part didn't get wet and was his only weak point. Now that we have explained this, we can return to the main story of the Trojan War. According to Homer's epic poem The Iliad, the Trojan War was caused by a love triangle, but if it did actually take place, it's far more likely that the reason was a mundane one: money. Specifically, Troy was strategically located on the Dardanelles, or the Hellespont as it was known in antiquity, and this allowed it control over the essential trade routes connecting with the Black Sea. But since we're talking about mythology, we'll stick to the legend, which is much more interesting anyway. Hector and Paris, sons of King Priam of Troy, had traveled to Sparta to negotiate a friendly treaty. But during their stay, Paris and Helen, wife of the Spartan king Menelaus, had fallen in love. It's not clear whether he kidnapped her or she decided to run away with him to Troy. But in any case, when Menelaus found out, he was furious. He went straight to see his brother Agamemnon, king of Mycenae, and asked his help to kill the Trojans. The Atreidae gathered a massive fleet of over 1,000 boats and recruited a huge army with the best Greek, Achaean, and Aeolian warriors. Among them was Achilles, who didn't really like King Agamemnon, but was considered to be the best warrior in the world. Together with Achilles was Patroclus, his comrade in arms, who also polished his sword, if you know what I mean. queen. And there was also Odysseus, king of Ithaca and better known by his Roman name Ulysses. More on him later. The massive army travelled to Troy and were unable to take the city straight away, so they laid siege to it. This lasted for 10 years and gave time for plenty of things to happen. Agamemnon kidnapped Chryseis, made her his concubine, but later had to free her when the gods intervened. Instead he took Briseis from Achilles, which made him abandon the battle. Then Patroclus dressed up as Achilles and died fighting Hector, which made Achilles return and kill Hector in revenge. This in turn made Paris kill Achilles, shooting an arrow through his heel. But then Paris died at the hands of Philoctetes, son of the king of Thessaly, who had arrived late to the battle because he had been bitten by a snake. After all these deaths, but no changes in the course of the war, Odysseus came up with a sneaky plan to enter Troy. The Greeks built a massive wooden horse, left it outside the city walls, and made it appear as if they had abandoned the war and left. And it worked! The Trojans took the horse into the city, and that night the best Greek warriors came out of it, opened the gates for the rest of the army, which had hidden nearby, and finally conquered Troy. King Priam of Troy died in the battle, and King Menelaus of Sparta recovered his wife Helen. This was the end of the Trojan War. After the war, Agamemnon returned to his own kingdom, but the curse of the Atreidae was far from over. Agamemnon's wife Clytemnestra wanted revenge for the death of her daughter Iphigenia, who had been sacrificed by Agamemnon to the goddess Artemis so that his fleet could depart for Troy. Clytemnestra and her lover Aegisthus killed Agamemnon while he was sleeping, and their remaining children, Electra and Orestes, fled the court in fear and despair. Orestes went to stay with his uncle Strophius, king of Phocis. Years later, the siblings met again in front of Agamemnon's tomb and vowed to seek revenge. They killed Aegisthus and their own mother Clytemnestra, but then the Erinyes, the deities who punished parricide, chased Orestes and drove him mad. Both siblings were judged in Athens, but the god Apollo intervened to win the trial and free Orestes. There were other heroes who went through great adventures on their way back from the Trojan War. One of these stories is told in the Aeneid, the account of Aeneas, who reached the Italian peninsula. According to Roman tradition, his descendants were Romulus and Remus, who founded the city of Rome. Another famous story is Homer's Odyssey, which tells the tale of Odysseus, king of Ithaca, who took 2 years to return home. During his journey, he had to deal with the Cyclops Polyphemus, fight the Laestrygonians, a tribe of man-eating giants, cross Hades, and avoid the songs of the Sirens, who in Greek mythology were half human and half bird. In the island of Ogygia, Odysseus and his crew were captured by the sea nymph Calypso, who wanted to marry him. After escaping, Odysseus finally managed to return to Ithaca, only to find a line of suitors pestering his wife Penelope, since everyone presumed him dead. Instead of sending them away, Odysseus and his son Telemachus just killed them all. The Trojan War marked the end of the Age of Heroes and Greek mythology. All the demigods eventually passed away, and their souls went to the legendary Fortunate Isles, while we, the humans of the Age of Iron, inherited the Earth. At this point in history, the Dorians, who considered themselves the descendants of Heracles, moved south and took over all of Greece until the Dark Age of 1200 BC, when writing was lost, so no records remain of the next 500 years. History resumed in the 8th century BC, thanks to authors like Homer and Hesiod, who left us these fantastic adventures, the blockbusters of the ancient age. And the rest is history. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave us a big like. Take care, and I'll see you in the next video.